Okay, hopefully my
I've been recording the last 8 minutes, actually.
amazing. So it's just 8 minutes of you talking, but you can't hear me. It's always quite weird when you listen back to just one side of the conversation.
It's a bit freaky, actually.
It's really weird. Great. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, welcome everyone. It's a Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast. Hopefully you're in the right place. This is episode 15. Amazing, episode 15 already. We're recording a couple of weeks in advance, actually, so some of our sharp and incisive political commentary and obviously our small talk around the weather may not necessarily be relevant when you actually hear the episode, but it gives us something to talk about, I suppose, James, doesn't it?
Well, you make disparaging comments about the weather, but I was doing some research on Instagram the other day, and I happened to find that many of the weather pages, is that what you call them? Weather pages? Weather feeds, sorry, have in excess of 100,000 followers. So maybe we should shift some of the topics of our conversation towards that. We would, maybe increase our profile a little bit.
Could be. Although having said that, James, of course, as we've documented on our Instagram page or feed, whichever you prefer, we have got a fairly decent listenership so far, and we're really, really pleased with the interest that there's been in the podcast. I got a couple of contacts this week, people getting in touch through email, which is really nice. Shout out to Scott, who goes by Smokin' Jazz. You can find his profile on Instagram. He's over in Virginia. Norfolk Beach, I think, if I haven't got that wrong, and big fan of the project, big fan of the podcast. So I had a little bit of back and forth with him. He's particularly interested in Milestone. Also Anthony, who I think's based in Devon now, but he had been going through some of his old photos in the lockdown and sent us a few samples of amazing pictures of him in Candy, which we've already talked about in one of our previous episodes. Him, and not only him, but the owner of Candy, and indeed Peter Brutzmann as well, the free jazz musician that we referenced on that podcast too. So it's really nice for people to get in touch. We really appreciate the interest. It's really interesting how many people have not only interest in this culture, but actually have experienced them themselves and have been and visited various places. So if you're listening now and you're thinking, when are they going to talk about X, Y, and Z place? The chances are in one of the upcoming episodes, so please just sit tight and hopefully we'll get to it. The only reason that we won't be talking about it is either that we haven't been or it was closed before we began the project. So hopefully wherever you have experienced yourself, we'll get to it in the podcast.
Yeah, it's you mentioned people asking because I've had a couple of similar mails or texts from listeners who said like, oh, James, I remember you talking about this joint maybe 10 years ago, when I started my website, when all I would have is, a little flip top phone, grainy picture and a couple paragraphs describing it and, the website link if the shop had one. And that was maybe about half of the entries on my website database site, was that. And so a friend of mine was saying it was just great to hear you and me talking about the place for 10, 15 minutes. He just got a much better feel looking at the pictures and hearing our stories. And so it was almost like, almost like sending him there, you know what I mean? As he heard us talking about it. And that was like the best feedback that we could get, I think, because it's really, really hard. We've said it so many times, right, Philip? Like, it's really hard to explain the atmosphere in one of these jazz joints if you've never been. If you have been, you know exactly what we're talking about. But if you've never been, it's just such a unique thing. And so, having us talk in the pictures is as close as you can get to having a trip there yourself. That's pretty much the best compliment that we could get. So, yeah, that's not patted ourselves on the back enough. What, should we just call it a day now? Is that enough?
I think we could continue to pat just a little bit longer because it's not the only achievement that we've had this week, James. Is it? I think if rumors are to be believed, that you finally, with a little bit of help from a friend, discovered how to put GIF arrows onto your Instagram stories. Is that correct?
That is half correct. I did understand the directions of how to put GIF arrows onto my Instagram stories. However, my stories keep disappearing, and I don't know why that is. So I do need to do a little bit more research on why I can make a story and then it's gone. That's quite frustrating.
So as always, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back with you when it comes to technology. But we'll get there, won't we?
We will get there. And listen, what can I say? The fact that I can even do Instagram by myself, I'm taking that as
it's an achievement, because I know for a fact that you weren't looking at Tokyo Jazz Joint's Instagram stories for quite some time, because I could never understand you asking me why I hadn't posted stuff, and I was thinking to myself, it's on the story. Why hasn't he seen it? But anyway, listen, enough of the recriminations. Let's go to our first place this week. We're going to head to Kanazawa, which, if you're not familiar with, is on the far side of Japan from Tokyo. It's on that coast that if you jumped off and kept swimming, you'd eventually reach China. I went actually to Bokunen. We went separately. So I was there with my wife. We went on a weekend trip in the car and took in Kanazawa. There's a couple of other places in Kanazawa as well that I visited that we'll probably get to in a different episode. But Bokunen was definitely one of the standouts. So we kind of referenced it briefly, I think, when we were talking with Benedict from Rhinoceros in a previous episode. But it really depends. I think your experience of Bokunen, or certainly your first impressions, would depend entirely on what angle you approach it from. Because if you're to approach it from the car park at the back, which is where I initially started out, what you're met with is kind of a slightly, I mean, if it wasn't Japan, I think you'd be slightly nervous about heading down this sort of grey concrete alleyway that's fairly badly lit. If you were to approach it from the front on foot, what you come to is this beautiful traditional Japanese garden gate, ancient trees above you, and you pass in through this gorgeous light and you walk in along a Japanese style garden. I mean, you could, for all intents and purposes, be heading into a temple. You'll pass a big glass sign that says Jazz Spot Bokunen, which advertises as, and I quote, good time, good music, good foods, and good drink. Would you say, James, if you were to give it a Yelp review, that would be a fairly decent reflection of what you found?
I would say that is 100% accurate. The first time that I went, I showed up in the morning because I was passing through Kanazawa on my way to a music festival in the neighboring prefecture. And so I wanted, of course, to... Kanazawa is a very old merchant town, as you mentioned, on the coast. And it's fairly well preserved. It's not like a lot of the rundown regional cities that we've talked about here on the show before, and that are pretty much all around Japan because of the aging society, et cetera, et cetera. Kanazawa is very lively. It's still thriving. And they've done a really good job of keeping all of the traditional sort of atmosphere without making it into sort of a cheeseball tourist land. It's one of the more authentic places in Japan, putting it that way. So I was so excited to take a walk. And Bokunen, a bit far from the station, but I was, this was in the summer, and I'll never forget this, Philip, because I was listening to a baseball game on the radio, coming from the States, and in San Francisco, and the guy was pitching a no-hitter, which is an exciting event in baseball for our non-American friends. And I remember walking past the castle area and the park and all the sort of old wooden shops where you've got the water running in the gutter. You know that how they have that in a lot of the Japanese towns, for the drainage. And I was just thinking, like, wow, this is just a perfect morning. Here I am listening to an amazing baseball game, walking through this beautiful Japanese town. And just when the game ends, I arrive at Bokunen and I walk into this gorgeous jazz cafe. And I pretty much just thought, you know what? I think it's time to start drinking because the day's not going to get any better than this, Yeah. You were correct on the entryway. The entryway is very lovely. The room is very narrow. You can see in one of the pictures that they've got that huge table. And as I was sitting there having coffee, just about getting ready to chat to the husband and wife owner, then the lunch crowd came in. And I quickly realized that people were not necessarily just coming for the jazz. They were actually coming to eat, and he was cooking up a storm in the kitchen.
That's right.
So it functions definitely very much as a cafe, in addition to the jazz. But after the lunch crowd left, I don't know if you had a chance to really chat with the two of them, but they were amazing. He spent a lot of time in Tokyo as a student and then afterwards working for a couple years, and actually was a regular at our favorite joint, Pithecanthropus erectus.
That's right. That was the connection. No, I did have a chance to talk to him. Sarah and I were there, as you can see from my photographs, at nighttime, obviously, but we did go in. It wasn't overly busy, I think, and so we did kind of, we sat at that counter, the third photograph along there, you can see the JBL flag. We sat around there and got chatting to him in particular. And I think once I mentioned the project, then Pithecanthropus came up and he said he'd been there, I think, was it like junior high school student? And I kept thinking to myself, so that make you about 13 or 14 and you were hitting those jazz cafes nice and early. If only I'd been such a cool 13, 14-year-old. But yeah, they were a lovely couple.
His destiny must have been set then, because if you were doing it at that age, like, how the hell are you going to go work for a Japanese company? I mean...
Absolutely, yeah. You can see as well from the photographs that obviously Miles is definitely winning the battle for wall space.
100%, including that absolutely priceless concert poster.
Yeah.
Which for our non-Japanese readers, it says Kanizawa, and then it says Miles blowing the wind. It doesn't translate very well directly, but basically Miles is playing in Kanazawa in 1973 and July 1st. Another Miles in Japan poster. This must be at least the fifth or sixth one that we've seen on our journeys. I wanted to steal every single one of them because you can't find these. You can't even find them on eBay. It's like they might have only printed, maybe, a couple dozen to advertise in the local regional city.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, it's like you say, it's that one specifically is Kanazawa. So, there's not going to be a need for thousands and thousands of those posters. And again, probably back in 73, I mean, you mentioned about Kanazawa preserving this kind of character that it has. And I think, if I'm not wrong, that they've only recently put in a Shinkansen line from Tokyo. So I suppose that lack of connection or direct connection with the capital has probably helped keep a little bit more of its character and sort of prevented that mass tourism. But certainly in 73, I would imagine, going over to Kanazawa and that coast nearer China was probably a real bit of a trek, I would imagine. So,
yeah. I mean, Japan is a smaller country than some, but it's long and it's incredibly mountainous. So what looks on the map as 150 kilometers, because of the mountains, can take you, 3 or 4 hours on the local train. Sometimes even more. You got to go all the way up and around. So you're exactly right. I took the Shinkansen out there right when that connection came, and now it's very easy. But it's certainly a regional place of Japan. It has no connection to the Tokyo, Osaka, east side, and they maintain that character to this day, and including the Bokunen. I mean, there's a great jazz. They call it Jazz Street in Japan. A Jazz Street is like a 2 or 3 day festival with indoor and outdoor gigs. Yeah. And I went to the Kanazawa Jazz Street 2 years ago, and it was amazing. I mean, there were live gigs everywhere, even random little things on the street corner, the proper ones to pay in the park, and almost all the bars had live gigs going on. And this is not a huge city. It's a regional city of a couple 100,000 people. So having that level of jazz festival was just so impressive.
Tidy looking graphics as well. I always appreciate that in some of the places. And I still got a couple of beer mats that I took. You can see the design in particular on in between the couple that run the place in that photograph too. I also really like, just from a personal point of view, I love the photograph with the framed kanji up on the sort of shelf, almost like a Butsudan type shelf, and then that framed picture of Billie Holiday just beside it. For me, there's something about that just encapsulates jazz joints. You know, you've got the two elements of them there in one picture, and it was a gorgeous place. So if you're ever in Kanazawa, you're around that area, and there are a couple of other cracking places that we'll touch on in different podcasts, but or different episodes. But certainly, don't miss Bokunen if you do manage to get up to Kanazawa. It's a very worthwhile visit for sure.
Well, from Kanagawa, we're going to go all the way back right into the western part of Tokyo to a very different kind of place. Also a lunch place, but very different in atmosphere. And that's Misty. And Philip, it's strange. I've been to Misty probably 6 or 7 times, and yet when I saw the notes for today's show, I couldn't remember which shop it was.
Yeah, I mean, I put Misty in there because, I mean, this is the second part of the Weird and Wonderful series. So, you know, there's obviously going to be a lot of overlap with the places that we talk about. You know, some of them fit in multiple categories, as you can imagine. And certainly for me, I just thought Misty is one of those things that maybe one of those places that doesn't quite fit in. I mean, yes, it's a jazz cafe, as you can see from the sign. It's in a fairly, there's a lot of footfall there, so it's a pretty busy area, but when we went there, it was a Saturday, I think. It was certainly, judging by the pictures, it was daytime. And I just remember being kind of crammed in on a little bench next to you. And we were looking just at a wall. And above us on the wall, you can see a little snippet of them there with the Frank Sinatra DVD and the Blue Note book. Or is that a DVD as well? You can see, like, there had these kind of shelves that were deliberately designed to display records and different kind of books and jazz memorabilia. But we sat the whole time kind of just crammed in that counter next to people and looking up there. And it was pretty hard to photograph in there. That was kind of the best that we could do in the time that we had. There was not, I mean, and again, it's a good thing, of course, for the owners. I mean, there didn't seem to be any likelihood of the place opening out at any time that we were there. And as you can see from the back of the place, it's absolutely covered in advertisements for different kinds of food. They also sell, I think, loose leaf tea and coffee as well. So it's kind of a jazz cafe plus alpha, really, isn't it? It's sort of all things to all people.
Yeah, it's got a lot of sort of, healthy ingredients on the menu, a lot of different coffees from around the world. And I think we were talking before recording that if you just took the jazz off the sign, it would function perfectly just as a neighborhood cafe for coffee and lunch, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
But when you go in and look around, like you said, you've got the Blue Note, the Frank Sinatra there, and then you've got a great picture that you were able to capture the Denon turntable with the Mingus album in the background. So you will be hearing jazz there all day long. And like I mentioned, I've been there. The reason I've been there so often is because once a year in October is the Asagaya Jazz Street Festival, and Misty is in the neighborhood of Asagaya, a little bit west of Shinjuku. And so at the Jazz Street, it's on a Friday and Saturday in late October. Again, the indoor and outdoor gigs. So I would always take that Friday off, come up, and I'd go to Misty and have coffee around lunchtime, and then get ready to wander around all the gigs. So I have been going there, pretty regularly over the last 10 years or so. Unfortunately, I just heard that the Jazz Street's going to be canceled this year, like almost every festival. So more sad news due to C-19. But look, the cafe is still there, and it's the kind of place that I would say, like, it really will always have a customer base, because the jazz isn't really the major focus of it. It's more of a coffee shop,
I don't remember the owner either. I'm not sure if that slightly eerie kind of statue thing outside is meant to be modeled on the owner, but rumor has it, wherever you stand, the eyes follow you.
I don't like to talk about that guy, so let's just skip over that. Yeah.
Let's leave some of those traumas for maybe a separate episode of its own. What do you think? Okay, so we just wanted to mention Misty, I suppose, because it's one of those slightly anomalous places, but it is a jazz cafe. There is a history there. There's definitely a love for the music, and for that reason, it fits well within the parameters of the project. But Again, not probably one of the standout sort of headline type joints, but interesting and worth just mentioning in its own way. So we're going to move on to probably. I mean,
sorry,
it started already.
I can't. I just can't.
One of the
help it.
one of the more surreal, I think, afternoons. It's almost inconceivable, I would say, if you're listening, unless perhaps you're listening in Japan, that you've been to this place. And if you have, I'd say the sort of chance, I'd say go buy a lottery ticket, because we didn't really, Danmo was one of the places that we had turned up on a jazz map, and we were out in Saitama, and we've mentioned already now a few times that some of these trips to the prefectures around Tokyo, they look ostensibly quite short journeys on the map, but when you're driving from place to place, they are actually quite far away. And Danmo, I remember, was part of a day trip to Saitama in the car, and the place that we went, I think it's safe to say that the city that it was based in, if you would call it a city, certainly a large town, there would be no reason to have ever gone there had it not been for this place. And going to this place itself was just a name. Like, we were literally just following the trail of this name, Danmo. I don't think you were familiar with it. And so we just kind of headed out.
No, not at all. I didn't even know the city, Kitamoto in Saitama Prefecture. I'd never heard of it. Your description is even being generous. Not only would you have no reason to go there, it's a place you would actively avoid going to because it's so flat, so hot, completely nondescript.
It was so hot that day.
Just the most mind-numbing of suburban city planning in Japan.
But safe to say though that we weren't disappointed, were we? And I mean, for various reasons.
I mean, as soon as we saw the sign, and this is a place that if you're listening by now on this episode, I think you know the drill. Go to TokyoJazzJoints.com, go to the regions A to G, and then go look at Danmo, because you've got to see just the exterior first. I don't know exactly. It sort of looks like the signs you would see for a piano teacher. The way that sign is laid out.
I was thinking it looks like it's been designed on the Japanese version of Microsoft Word and then printed really large. Like, I mean, if you think of the gorgeous, beautiful graphics that we've seen in a lot of these places over the years. And it also looks very much like it's got that snacku feel again that we've talked about. The kind of
snacku feel, and I've got to translate this for our non-Japanese speaking listeners. So you see the circular sign, okay, and it says 11 to 4 p.m. Above that is the Chinese characters, the kanji. It says kissa. We always talk about jazz kissaten, right? Coffee house, tea house, okay? But below that, it says 5:30 p.m. to 11. And above it, it says yofu izakaya, which means Western-style drinking pub, is how you would translate that, okay? So it's immediately okay, this isn't a Japanese restaurant type place. This is a Western type vibe. So just keep that in mind as you look through the next couple of pictures.
So the first, when we got there, James, and it annoys me that I didn't write this down, because I think for the way that it sticks in my head, it's frustrating me that I can't remember the exact details, but I do remember kind of just going over and over it in my head after we left. So we didn't get in the first time, right? So we turned up at the door. We were like, is this it? Could this be it? And eventually we kind of plucked up the courage. We went to the door, and I remember a man who must be in his 80s coming out, and he just sort of kind of shook his head and said, lunch isn't ready, or something along those lines.
Yes, he did say that. He immediately said lunch is not ready. I definitely remember that because, first of all, we didn't even ask about lunch. If you're a loyal listener, you'll know my policy on eating in any of these places. So clearly lunch was not on the itinerary. But he must have assumed that was why we were there. Otherwise, why would we come?
And it was well past the time. Like, I think that was the other confusing thing. It was like well past 11. and so we were really confused because he was in there and it was open, but he just said, "Oh, lunch isn't ready." So we instead of sort of saying anything, we just went, "Oh, okay, but are you open?" And he just went, "No." So we kind of just wandered off, really, didn't we, with our tail between our legs, wondering what had just happened. Where did we end up?
We ended up in, I guess you would call it a civic hall, a civic community center. It's the type of building that was built in the 1980s in pretty much every, nondescript town around the country due to how could you say, pork barrel politics, I guess. There was a lot of money. There was a lot of lobbying by the construction industry. So, my town of 3,000 people, we need a new 5-story community center with libraries and music halls and rehearsal spaces that nobody ever uses. So you find these white elephant buildings everywhere in Japan. They're almost always empty, spotlessly clean. They're really freaky. I got to be honest, I've been lost in a couple of them, and there's just nobody ever around using them. So we killed some time there because it was so blisteringly hot outside. Just thinking, okay, this town is as boring as any we've been to, but we have to force our way into this joint. We actually had that conversation. Do you remember? We were debating whether we should try to go back or not, or whether he was just going to not let us in.
Yeah, but happily we did go back, and the second time, for whatever reason, whether lunch was ready or not, we got in, and I mean, it looks really like someone was just in the process of moving out. Like it was as you can see from the photographs, a kind of a fairly functional, probably quite roomy Japanese apartment if you've ever lived in an apartment in Tokyo. But he was behind the counter there, beavering away, making food for customers that weren't there. There was a bike parked in the cafe.
Wait. You have to go back to the food. Okay, look at the picture you took of him cooking, where he's got the Parmesan cheese and the plate, and then the half full ashtray.
Well, I mean, it's what you want, isn't it?
I mean, it's just like. Is he just cooking up pasta for all the customers? I mean, we've seen a lot of places where they do the lunch sets, but I mean, I think this guy could have been in his late 80s. Like, he was definitely hard of hearing. And he was very frail, really, I think, really slow. He moved really slow. And I was quite worried about him behind there in the kitchen, which is, probably offensive. He's been doing this for years. He knows what he's doing. But I was just thinking, how could this guy run this place? And after that, that's when I saw the bicycle. And again, I was thinking oh my God, I hope that's not his bike, Well,
I mean, again, Japan being Japan, it probably is. He'd probably be riding that bike till he's 100 or more. But I think of all the places we've been, probably the least welcoming. I mean, he did not want us there. He kind of very sort of begrudgingly brought us a drink. But we did get talking to a customer then did turn up, and I think we got talking to that customer who had lived overseas. Was that it?
Yeah, that's right. Well, interestingly, a much younger man, but of retirement age, came in, and as soon as he saw us, I think you had already stood up to take some pictures. So he started to talk to me, and he spoke to me in English right away. And he said, "Oh, you speak English?" I said, "Yes, yeah." And he said, "Oh, I lived in America for 5 years on business, so I learned to speak a little bit." And I was like, "Okay, great." So we had a little bit of a chat, and he had retired. He lived in the town, and he said that he came here pretty much, 3-4 times a week for coffee, and at nighttime for the gigs. And I don't think it had really kicked into me yet that they were actually still doing live gigs in this space. I think it was I just thought it was on the sign from years ago, but that clearly nobody was actually putting on a performance in this room. But sure enough, you got the sign up there. They were still doing gigs on Friday and Saturday nights. A lot of live vocalists, sometimes even people coming up from Tokyo.
And the plot thickens, doesn't it? Because if you do a little bit of rummage around the internet, of course, not only can you find one website for Danmo, you can actually find two. And the original website, the last entry was 2015. in their sort of news, but down at the bottom, there's a website which goes to dammocafemix.jp, and the most recent entry there is the 7th of February, and it's all the entries are for live gigs or scheduled for gigs, so it's still going strong. Whether or not the old guy that runs it...
Breaking news.
Oh.
Sorry to say, I kept this from you, but after our pre-production meeting, I did make a phone call to Danmo, and the line is disconnected. So, unfortunately, it would seem like the place is closed.
Oh, no, that's so sad.
Unless, because that website does seem to be 5 years old, maybe the phone was, And there's something fishy here, though, Philip. This guy, there's no way this guy could make a website. This guy didn't even have, he's the kind of old man that wouldn't even have a cell phone, So who made these two websites? Was it maybe a son or someone in his family, a regular customer? Somebody must have made those websites as simple as they are. So perhaps the place took over and they just, maybe they changed the phone or they're using their cell phone. Who knows? But I will do a little bit more detective work for next week because now I'm intrigued. Don't necessarily want to catch the train all the way up to Kitamoto City, but
no.
I would like to know.
You could check out that Civic Center. I know you're a big fan. It's interesting. The two phone numbers are the same on both websites, so it would seem perhaps that even on the most recent website, which of course, like I said, was February, the last entry, presumably this year, it may well be that it is closed, which again, I suppose, and we haven't set this up, this is genuine breaking news, but it does just show you the the sort of fragility of this kind of culture, I think, and particularly where places are run by much older people, which is probably the majority of joints that we've been to, and certainly the ones that we've talked about so far, apart from our episode on younger owners. They really are, in many cases, functioning on a shoestring. They're definitely very prone to being closed down for, financial or economic reasons. And probably the biggest threat, I suppose, is the age and the health of the owners. So if Danmo has closed down, considering that, 2-3 months ago it was still having gigs, that's a real shame. And it's again, just great that we were able to make it up there and document it. However surreal an experience it was. The owner himself, I think, wasn't keen to be photographed, as you can probably guess. We did ask him, of course. He did sort of say, well, okay, but, there was no
he wasn't
question.
He was
definitely
just,
not, no.
Yeah, he was just like, take whatever you want. I mean, do you remember the Cafe Olé that actually came to us?
Yes, I do. Yes. As I've said, trauma we'll keep for a separate episode.
Yeah.
So anyway, Danmo, that was our experience of that place, and what a place indeed. If you there are lots of other great places in Saitama which we're going to get to in different episodes of the podcast as well. So don't worry if you're living in Saitama and listening out there, you won't be able to make it to Danmo, unfortunately, but certainly there's lots of other great places that you can check out if you're out that way. So to finish up today, then we're going to head back to Tokyo. It takes about an hour on the train, or an hour and 15 minutes if you're driving. Where are we off to next?
Okay, we are all the way back into the center of Tokyo, but down an alleyway that feels a million miles away from the center, to a very special place that I was a regular at, I would say, for about 7 or 8 years until I moved down here to Yokohama, and it's called KissaSakaiki. Kissa, of course, being the tea house cafe. Sakaiki, you can't really translate directly into English. Something along the lines of tea meeting record, if you're going to go for that. But
slightly less catchy.
Yeah, it does. Sometimes the words just don't come directly, but owned by the really, really unique person. Fukuchi-san is about our age, and he was a big fan of the old jazz kisaten culture. So when he got the opportunity to rent this space, he decided to open. But rather than imitate that sort of classic style that we've described in detail and that we love so much. He wanted to make something a little different, and he definitely did. You can see from the second picture, you captured the entryway, so you've got to take your shoes off when you come in. Now, anytime you take your shoes off going into a place in Japan, you immediately think in your mind, oh, okay, this is going to be a traditional Japanese space with tatami mat and you sit on the floor, etc. But strangely enough, KissaSakaiki is actually designed more like a European tea salon. It has a lot of wood. You can see some of the knickknacks, the clocks, the lamps, some of the artwork, very much a kind of like an old 19th century type of like atmosphere. But at the same time, the music is all on the experimental side. So he's playing, ambient music, he's playing free jazz, just the mix of styles in there is unbelievable. And the best thing of all is the back room. So you go into this big back room, which is bigger than the cafe space. And pretty much every day in the afternoon and then again in the evening, he has events going on. Anything from live dance, live music, artwork, spoken word performances, calligraphy lessons, cooking lessons, pretty much everything. So it really functions as both a cafe and an art space with this weird sort of European vibe to it. There's not really any place else like this in Tokyo. And as I said, I used to go there once a week for a good 6-7 years. And every time I was there, Fukuji-san would introduce me to somebody different. Somebody working in the field of art or music, and he always was a really, really good host and took the time to introduce everybody. So I would recommend if you come by. He loves having guests from overseas. Definitely, you should stop in.
Yeah, I'd say like it's one of those places that it seems like very much a certain type of customer goes to, and that everyone who does go there is of a like mind or connected in some way or other. I think for me, what stuck out, I think it's probably one of the only places, bar maybe a couple of exceptions, that we ever had to take our shoes off. But certainly, when you go in, it has this beautiful, almost like antique salon kind of feel. You can see that particularly from the speakers and this beautiful chest with the clock and the sewing wheel. And then there's kind of a door which just opens up into this huge rehearsal space around the back. You can see that in one of the photographs as well. There's a sort of a mixture of chairs lined up and then a huge speaker as well. And there's this enormous kind of space at the back. And I know they have kind of talk events. He mentioned something when we were there about students getting together and using it. And I think we've even discussed the possibility of maybe showing a few pictures from the project there next time I'm back. So it is a really... I don't know, there's something about it to me felt like going back in time a bit. I could imagine going in there and then stepping back out into that more radical, kind of politically active Tokyo sort of student 60s kind of vibe, that existed in Tokyo at the time. There was something that transports you back a little bit. Not that I was there, but just certainly as how I imagine it, it's the sort of place
sure.
I see Murakami and these people hanging out potentially.
There's something a little mysterious about Sakaiki. It kind of always seemed, a little bit dark because it is like down an alleyway. You could see from that first picture, it's sort of in between a group of houses. I don't know what the neighbors think when he has the free jazz gigs on, but I guess he's been able to deal with that because he's been open for so long. But yes, it's certainly a place where you have to seek it out to go there. It's not a place that you randomly walk by and pop in for coffee. So pretty much anybody that walks through the door is there on purpose, and generally is a repeat customer. Actually, it's funny. I just remembered years ago when I first started my website, and I decided that, once a month I'm going to do like a drinks night in a different jazz joint and try to get like-minded people to come. Realized after a year that was a pretty boring thing to do, so I stopped it. But we had
took you a year to realize that.
There were a few good nights in between. Good nights. Mm-hmm. Great night in Stick, R.I.P. But at Sakaiki, actually, we had a really good one because that was one that I took the time to promote. And we had about 25 or 30 people. And so we were all playing music and just people were talking about where they like to go, listen to tunes. And it was kind of, you see a lot of times in Tokyo, I guess this is the case in a lot of Asian cities, but, expats will have their certain, groups, they got the jogging club or whatever, the people who go out to the clubs together. But nobody was doing like a jazz thing. So that was my idea. When I told Fukuchi-san about it, he was 100% into it. He was just like, that's the kind of community space that I want to create. So anybody can come in at any time, So yeah, really, a really warm, interesting place. His English is not very good. So bring someone who speaks Japanese, because he's actually quite a deep thinking cat. He'll go off on some pretty interesting tangents about art and philosophy and how it all relates to jazz in Asia. So I would put it as one of my top 10 places to visit in Tokyo for sure.
Nice. Well, that kind of wraps things up for the second part of this Weird and Wonderful series. I mean, the name itself, I suppose, is a little bit of a misnomer because in many ways, there's something weird and wonderful about all the jazz joints. But as I've said before, we're trying to just group them together and come up with a little bit of a thematic thread for some of the episodes rather than just a kind of a scattergun approach. And sometimes, obviously, that's geography and location, and sometimes it's things like this. And I think the places that we've covered this week and last week are just maybe ones that stand out as being, a little odd or a little more unusual than just, the more regular jazz kissa that we kind of have come to know and expect from the project. So it's been nice to revisit those places over the last couple of weeks. So, James, do you have any things that you need to plug this week? I don't know. Maybe you're getting sponsored.
No sponsorships yet, unfortunately, but plenty to promote. Of course, go to KOL Radio at Mixcloud. You can hear the latest episode of my OK Jazz podcast. You can hear DJ Otsuka's Sound Journey series. We've got a special mix made by Ian Martin here in Tokyo of really deep underground indie and punk rock Japanese bands. This is music that you will never be able to hear outside the country. And we've got a world music mix up there as well. So you've got a lot of different genres. Go to KOL Radio at Mixcloud.com.
Lovely. Anything else just before I carry on?
Nope, we're good.
You're all done. Listen, it's been great to talk this week. Thanks to everyone who's listening. Please, if you have like 2 minutes, pop over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please rate and review us. We want to get back up to the number one spot on the Japan Music Podcast chart for sure.
We're not number one anymore?
Well, it ebbs and flows. But in the meantime, please go to tokyojazzjoints.com. Have a rummage around on the site. There's 130 odd places there to look at. Please follow us and share anything that we post on social media. We're at tokyojazzjoints.com on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. That's where you can find out all the latest stuff that we're up to, and information about the upcoming episodes and so on and so forth. This week I'm going to post...
Always good stuff on the Instagram page.
Absolutely, yeah. Arrows and everything. It's got GIF arrows and everything. It's got everything. Although they keep disappearing.
I'm pouring another drink now.
That's yours. Listen, James, until next week, look after yourself. Take it easy,
safe,
and I'll speak to you.
Talk to you soon. Ciao.
Cheers. Bye.